ayer.
¿Ah, sí? Ya.
Sí.
Perfecto. Sí, ahí está. Ya.
¿Cómo están? Muy buenas tardes a cada uno y una de ustedes. Estamos muy contentos y felices que puedan estar hoy día, en esta tarde, con nosotros. Me presento, soy Daniel Halpen. Estamos contentos, no sé si se me nota, pero estamos felices de poder estar con una persona que es espectacular, como Michael Ungar. Es la persona que habla de la competencia tan relevante como la resiliencia para todos. Y antes de continuar, es muy importante que sigan, como cuando uno va al cine y le dicen acá hay medidas de seguridad. Bueno, acá no hay medidas de seguridad. Sin embargo, sí hay medidas para poder entender y escuchar a nuestro querido speaker, a nuestro querido experto ya, y les tienen que sí explicar cómo hacer la traducción simultánea. Entonces, dejo sin más a Carmen Girón, que nos va a explicar cómo van a hacer ustedes para cuando hable nuestro querido orador en inglés, ustedes puedan escucharlo en español. Carmen, muy buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Hola Daniel, ¿cómo estás? Muchas gracias. Tal como explicó Daniel, en esta reunión hay un servicio de interpretación simultánea disponible. Para eso ustedes tienen que marcar en la barra de herramientas de Zoom abajo un icono que dice interpretación. Tiene una forma de un globo terráqueo. Luego deben pincharlo y elegir el idioma español. Eso sirve entonces para escuchar todo lo que se habla en inglés traducido al español en tiempo real. Ahora la explicación en inglés. For those who are going to be listening to this event in English, you have simultaneous interpretation service available. At the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar, you will find an icon that has the shape of a globe. You have to click on it and then select English. And that way you will have every message that is spoken in Spanish translated into English for you. Thank you. Daniel.
Así es. Bueno, entonces, dicho ya lo anterior, no me queda más que para nosotros esto es muy especial, estamos muy felices. Cuando empezamos a pensar en este programa dijimos, ¿sabes qué? Vamos a tratar las mejores o las competencias más relevantes y vamos a escoger a los principales exponentes para ella. Y la verdad es que nada de esto sería posible si no tuviésemos el apoyo constante de una serie de colegios. Entonces lo que yo voy a tratar de hacer es darle esa participación a todos nuestros colegios queridos, que permiten, que facilitan, que de alguna u otra forma nos hemos relacionado con Educom y nos hemos apoyado a lo largo de este año, y que presenten, que hagan la moderación. Entonces, me es muy grato presentar primero a Grange, con Mónica Nelson, quien es la encargada de convivencia, quien va a presentar a nuestro querido participante, y después a John Sequez, nuestro querido rector de el Lincoln, que va a hacer la moderación con respecto a las preguntas que ustedes puedan tener. Con eso dejo a Mónica, quien va a presentar a Michael. Mónica.
Yo voy a presentar al doctor Michael Ungar. Él es académico, autor de 25 libros y un reconocido conferencista. Su blog, llamado Nurturing Resilience, puede ser leído en la página web de Psychology Today. Si quieren conocer más sobre el trabajo de este gran investigador académico, que tiene mucho para informarnos, el doctor Ungar, pueden navegar, revisarlo en su página personal, que es www.michaelungar.com. Así es que ahí está la información. Muchas gracias y muchas gracias a todos por estar acá.
Así es. Entonces, muchas gracias a ti, Mónica. Y ahora, todo toda la relevancia para Michael. Michael, ¿cómo estás? Muy buenas tardes. Se supone que alguien debiese estar traduciendo.
I am going to.
No.
I'm hoping that you can now see my screen. Can I just get a thumbs up from Daniel or somebody that you can see my screen?
Yes, your screen is okay.
Then that is wonderful. Well, first of all, a huge thank you to Danielle, John, Monica. Thank you for organizing this. And I am absolutely pleased to be speaking to you from the East Coast of Canada in a city called Halifax. And I hope that you are able to cope with this pandemic. We've certainly had our challenges here in Canada as well. What I'd like to do this evening is talk to you a little bit about this idea of resilience, and very specifically how it relates to you as families, and of course, children, and even schools. But let me begin not with a story about the pandemic, but more about just a story that will help you to understand a little bit about where I'm coming from when I think about resilience. I'm a professor, but I'm also a family therapist. And a little while ago, I was working with a family, and what caught my attention was that the mother brought her daughter to see me, who was 6 years old. The daughter was 6 years old, and the mother brings her to my office and pushes her in front of me and says, "Fix the little thief." And you're looking down, and I see this very normal looking 6-year-old girl. And what had happened was that the family had recently moved to my city. The little girl didn't know anybody. She'd gone to school and was very lonely, didn't really make many friends or anything else. And she wasn't a bad child, so nobody really noticed her. Anyways, what she did was that she had figured out her own solution to her problems of being lonely and not noticed. So one lunch hour, what she did was she snuck away from the school. We're just going to have you mute. There you go. What she does is this little girl leaves the school on her own, goes across the street to a little tiny grocery store. And at the back of the grocery store, there are these bins of candies. Now, I don't know if you have this in Chile or not, but in Canada, you can go in and the children can open up these bins and pick out little candies and put them into a brown paper bag. And what she did was then she was able to sneak back out of the store with this bag of candy, went back to the playground, and began to give out the candy to all the other children. Well, of course, this works like a great solution. Suddenly, all the other children think she's wonderful, and they play with her, and they notice her, and everything else. And supposedly, she did this for 2 weeks before the principal of the school noticed that this little girl was doing something very strange, and that all the other children were always chewing when they were next to her. Anyways, and they figured out what she was doing, that she was stealing the candy to make friends. So what we did as a team of helpers, of adults, is we arranged a different way for her to have friends. And what we did was, in this school, there was a junior kindergarten for children aged 4 years old. Now, this girl was 6. And what they did was, we arranged for the teacher in the junior kindergarten to come up to the kindergarten class, or the grade 1 class where the 6-year-old was, and gently knock on the door and say, we need some help teaching the little children. And would this girl, her name was Ginny, would Ginny please come and help teach the little children? Well, Ginny then gets up out of her seat in this grade 1 classroom, and like some movie star walks out of the classroom going, excuse me, I have to now go and teach. We did this with her 3 or 4 times. And what it did was it changed this girl's relationship with her peers, not by having her steal candy to get noticed, but now what we had done was we gave her a positive and powerful identity. We gave her a sense of contribution or meaning of being in her school. We gave her some real responsibilities for younger children. And all of those things, which are part of making a child resilient, was given to this girl so that she didn't have to choose the stealing of the candy. She could instead basically find her resilience in a more socially desirable way. That story has stuck with me as I've tried to understand resilience, because actually I travel the globe. I have partnerships and research partnerships all around the world, not in Chile at this moment, but in other Central, in Brazil, in Colombia, San Salvador, Mexico, other countries as well. This picture you're seeing here is actually of a child in Cambodia. This girl is probably about 11 or 12 years old, and she is looking after her younger sibling. Her parents work in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of these places that tourists come to. And I meet children like this all over the world who are part of our research studies. And if you were to ask her, do you like looking after your younger brother or sister when your parents are working? She might say, oh, I wish I didn't have to do that. But actually, what she gains from that responsibility for herself and the contribution she makes to her family is a sense of power. And again, these same things, meaning, responsibility, a powerful identity, a sense of being older, all the things that we know make children resilient. So let me see if I can sort of help you understand a little bit about what it is that actually creates resilience. When we begin to think about resilience, I think sometimes we focus all on the rugged individual. We talk about making our children stronger, mindful, like more grit, more powerful minds. And while that is a really good way to approach resilience, it's a good solution when problems are relatively few. As problems get more increasing in a child's life, what we actually know is that children don't just have to be, well, rugged and strong in their minds, they also have to be resourced. They have to have the supports around them as their problems get more and more complex. Now, in normal times, children have a balance, right? They take on just enough challenges, sporting activities, learning assignments, whatever, so that they always can kind of manage the stress that they're given from around them. But of course, there's crisis. Parents divorce, a pet in the family dies, something bad happens. And you'll see a child, suddenly the resources that they have are not enough to cope with the stress that they're experiencing. And of course, during COVID, this pandemic, I'm not sure, again, what happened was that a lot of extra stressors piled onto children. Now they had medical health concerns. They were worried about their parents, maybe their families, somebody had lost their job because of the pandemic in the household. And suddenly they don't just have more stress, but they also had fewer resources. Here in Canada, where I was, children were taken out of school. They couldn't see their friends. All their sporting activities were taken away from them. And those things actually made it worse because suddenly they didn't have the way to actually fix their own stressors. So when I'm starting to think about resilience, what I'm really talking about is this what kind of stress is a child under? And in fact, I was just involved in a large study in the United States of parents and children and young adults and people who are employed. And one of the things that we found out of the Cigna Resilience Index was this particular pattern, that younger children were not being as badly affected by the pandemic. If you think about it, their lives weren't all that different than they were before the pandemic. But when we looked at children's lives in the middle of the pandemic, the people who were most affected were our teenagers. And if you think about it, teenagers, and I think in Chile, just as much as in Canada or the United States, it is a time when you begin to go out into the world. You start having friends, dating, girlfriends, boyfriends. You start thinking about jobs, going off to further your education, careers, jobs. All of that was taken away from our adolescents. And therefore, they were the ones who were the most stressed and showed the least of that sense of identity, power, control, resources. Like if you begin to think about what makes us resilient, their lives were most affected. So I guess what I'm really suggesting here is that resilience is that, I know we sometimes think of resilience just as my ability to overcome stress. But that puts an awful lot of responsibility on just us as individuals. And what the research on resilience is actually showing is something different now. What it shows is that our resilience is really our ability to navigate, to make our way, to find the psychological, social, cultural, physical resources that sustain, that give us well-being. But it also means our ability to negotiate or ask for what we actually find as meaningful. So if I could, maybe I could just do this. There's really just two key words here that I'd ask you to remember for this evening. One is we need to be able to navigate. We need to be able to, you're on a coastline on the Pacific Ocean. I'm on an ocean as well. If I was to get into a boat, I want to be able to navigate. I want to be able to set my sails. I want to be able to set my tiller. I want to go in a direction. But what's the point of navigating into the middle of the Pacific Ocean if there is no island to land upon? So navigation means not just having the motivation as a child to change your life or to make your life better. It's also about having places to go, sources of support that will actually help your life to be better. And of course, ultimately, it's also about, well, frankly, being able to ask for what you need in ways that make sense to you. So, for instance, let me give you an example. I was working with an 11-year-old boy who was being badly bullied at school, and he hated the breaks. He hated lunch hour. He didn't want to be with his other kids because he was always bullied. He had very bad teeth, and his parents didn't have much money, so he was dressed very badly, and he was teased a lot at school. So what he did was he figured out that what he could do was, rather than going onto the playground at lunch hour, what he did was he would actually go and find the janitor who cleaned the school. And then he would sort of, just go very close to the janitor. And because as long as he was close to the janitor and the janitor's shadow, none of the other children would tease him, of course, because there was an adult there, right? He had found his own solution to his particular sense of stress or exclusion. But even better than that, after about 2 weeks of this, the janitor, who's a really nice guy, looks down at this kid and says, "Oh my gosh, if you are always going to be underneath me and beside me, then pick up a mop and help me clean the school." And this 11-year-old, because by the way, in Canada, this is not usual. You would never ask a child or student to clean the school. That is not done. But in this case, this child, he picks up a mop and suddenly he has a role, a responsibility in the school. He's someone powerful. He has this adult who notices him, who's paying attention to him. And he mops the floor, and all the other children, rather than bumping him with their shoulders, now they walk around him because he's doing a job. If you have a wet floor, you don't walk across it, you walk around the wet floor. My point is that this little story talks about how a child navigated, found the resources he needed to feel safe, to feel like he belonged at school. But he negotiated, he found the resources that were meaningful to him. Now imagine a teacher had said, "Oh, look, no, you can't clean the school. You are a student, you must come to school, you must go on the playground, you must go find friends and everything else." he probably would have responded to that, at least in the context where I live, he would have said, I'm not going to go to school anymore. He would have dropped out. He would have done everything he could to be sick or whatever and not gone to school. But because he found this janitor who made him feel safe and a responsibility for something at the school, it was meaningful to him. And this is key. When we're talking about resilience in children, it is always important that we find the resources that are important to them. Now, there are, in fact, 9 different things that you as parents or teachers can actually do to make children more resilient, to help them navigate to these 9 things, to negotiate with them so they get these 9 things in ways that a child actually values. The first one you might love as parents. It is structure. It is routines. There was a recent study that showed that a child who actually has, oops, I'm just going to ask someone to please mute themselves. I think Carolina, maybe just ask you to put yourself on mute, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. There was a study of children during the pandemic who maintained routines. These would all be children who were not going to school. And what they found was that the families that had more routines, more structure, like bedtimes and meal times and chores and homework to do, actually had children with lower levels of anxiety and lower levels of depression. So there's something about a child having structure in their day, which is very important. Also consequences, or that a child has to basically fix their own mistakes when they happen. We also know that children need a very strong connection, well, frankly, with their parent, right? With all of you tuning in here. But we also know for resilience, often the problem is that there's so much emphasis on those parent-child connections that I think we sometimes forget that often we as adults are often very stressed when our children are stressed as well. So that's why in the research that we've done around the world, we've also found that children rely on lots of other strong relationships with their teachers, with a bus driver, with a janitor. Children need a network of other relationships with a coach, with a tutor. Anybody else can fulfill that role. And in fact, what we know is that when a healthy adult enters the life of a child, that can actually build the child's capacity to withstand stress much better. Children also need that powerful identity. Imagine that little 6-year-old girl that I started talking about at the beginning of my talk. She gets up out of her chair in a classroom in the school. A teacher has asked her to come and help teach the little ones. She rises, she walks out of that. Like some Hollywood movie star, like everyone noticing her. That is identity. We can give that to our children. When they share the special and unique things about themselves, they develop these powerful identities. But children also need a sense of decision-making, a sense that they can have some control over the decisions that actually are important to them. Years ago, I have 5 children. When my eldest son was just 10 years old, he was refusing to help set the table at dinner time. And I worked and my wife worked. And so, outside the home. So we needed the children to help contribute a little bit. Anyways, I would come home and make dinner. This was the routine. My wife did all the breakfast and got the children to school, and I would come home after school and do some of the dinner chores. And this 10-year-old child would always be, I don't know, gaming on the television or doing something to avoid his chore. And one day I said to him, that's it. I am fed up. His name is Scott. I am fed up. If you are not going to help set the table for dinner, I am not going to cook dinner for you. Well, he said, fine, I will make my own dinner. And I said, fine, as long as it is a healthy meal, you go and make your own dinner. Now, I know this might sound kind of shocking, but my point was I wanted to make sure that he could make decisions for himself. And what's more is I wanted him to feel, number 7 here, like he had a sense of belonging. He was part of our family and therefore also had responsibilities to that family. So he makes his little dinner, whatever. He brings it to the table. Afterwards, he has to clean up his own dishes and everything else. The next morning, I asked my son before he went to school, I said, are you going to contribute to the family and set the table, or are you going to be an independent little adult and cook your own dinner? And he very proudly says, oh no, tonight I'm going to cook my own dinner. I said, fine. So I gave him a little kiss and sent him off to school. And that evening, I went to the grocery store before coming home and I bought all the ingredients for his favorite meal. So when he finally came home from an after-school activity, the house smelled of garlic and meat sauce and all the things that he loved, lasagna, etc. And that night, he made his own little sandwich, and we, the rest of the family, ate a beautiful lasagna dinner. Now, you might think I'm heartless, but the next morning I asked him, Scott, are you going to do your chore and set the table, or are you going to make your own dinner? And my son looks at me and he hangs his head and he says, oh, I'll set the table. Now, my point with that is that I gave my son structure, a consequence that he could control, a sense of control, a sense of belonging in our family, rights and his responsibilities for others. I kept him safe. I didn't take food away from him. I didn't punish him. I gave him all the supports he needed to make a good decision. And eventually he did make a good decision. This pattern of resilience, this what I'm showing you here, is the things that we can actually give children. So let me give you a little quiz to think about your own child, okay? Can you assess your own child's resilience? All right, here's some questions. Can you fill in the blank? And what we know scientifically is a child who has more of these blanks filled will be a child who's actually better able to withstand stress, whether that's a tragedy or a pandemic or anything that is likely to make them feel more depressed. Okay, so there are people in my life who expect me to blank. Does your child clearly have expectations on them? When I don't meet expectations, I know that, well, frankly, blank will happen. Does he or she clearly know that there are expectations of how they should behave? I can reach out to my blank to get help when I need it. Is that child very clear that there are people in their life who can actually help them and support them? And can they reach those people when they need them? And it may not be you, the parent. It may be an aunt, a grandparent, a neighbor, a coach. Let me keep going. How about identity? I feel respected for what's special about me when I'm with or at or doing something special. How about in my blank, I get to participate in making decisions that affect my blank. I don't give a 3-year-old a decision about when they go to bed at night. They have a bedtime. But I will say to them, they can wear the pajamas that are blue or they can wear the pajamas that are green. Like if you have 2 sets of pajamas, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is that they brush their teeth and that they actually go to bed at a certain time, if in fact that's part of your family routine. How about at my blank, people miss me when I'm not there? Does your child actually have a community around them that they feel valued by? Maybe it's a faith community. Maybe it's a school community. Maybe it's an extended family that they are actually missed. There are places such as blank where I can celebrate my culture or my beliefs. Children really need that sense of cultural continuity, that sense that their life is embedded in something bigger than themselves. Or when I'm with others at my blank, I feel treated fairly. Does your child experience justice, social justice? Do they feel treated fairly? Do they have a sense that that even no matter if their language or their skin color or whatever, that they actually feel like they still are treated fairly. And that child that I talked about, the one who was sweeping, mopping the floor in the school, it was when he was with the janitor that he felt treated fairly. Or when I'm with blank, I am responsible for myself and others, that your child has a genuine responsibility. I am well cared for by somebody, and I feel safe when I'm with or at, say it, in my bed at night, that type of thing. I didn't just make up this list. This list comes from research in many different countries around the world. And very clearly, we know from the science that children who can complete these sentences tend to do much better. Now, I'm a scientist and a family therapist as well, so I guess I got to talk some science with you here. You know the story of Cinderella, I take it, right? Mother dies, father dies, she's left with the evil stepmother, and then she's a working child off. Remember, she's in the basement and she has to do all the chores for her evil stepmother and stepsisters. And then the fairy godmother, excuse me, comes along, waves the magic wand, turns a pumpkin into a carriage. Off she goes to the ball. She meets the prince and lives happily ever after. I mean, if you think about it, it's the Meghan Markle story. I hope everyone knows the story of Meghan Markle from the United States that ends up meeting Prince Harry. And anyways, I'm assuming that that story is global enough. But back to Cinderella. We focus so much on Cinderella. We call the story Cinderella, but it's not actually about Cinderella. Cinderella's resilience is about fairy godmothers. Without the fairy godmother, there is nobody to turn a pumpkin into a golden carriage. Without that fairy godmother, Cinderella never meets the prince. Which means, if I might, you all, as parents to the children in your lives, you are their fairy godmothers, or if you prefer, fairy godfathers, if you prefer. And that changes. This idea that Cinderella does it all on her own, that is not what the science of resilience.
Mark, you've muted yourself. Maybe you can unmute your mic.
There we go. My apologies.
There you go. Thank you, Mike.
Just Derek. So what this does, of course, is it raises an issue for us to better understand what makes resilience. And what we're actually understanding is we've been developing a program for schools as well called R2. And the R2 stands for rugged qualities and resources that children navigate to and negotiate for. In fact, maybe we should have called it R2, N2, because that's really the principles here. How can you help your child as their fairy godmothers, fairy godfathers, to make a child more rugged, stronger in their character, but also better resourced so that they can actually find the supports that they need to do well? Now, let me be a little more specific, if you will. About 10 years ago, there was a major disaster. I know right now with the Olympics in Tokyo, we are talking about and thinking about Tokyo and Japan. But about 10 years ago, there was a major disaster in Japan. You might remember that there was a tsunami, an earthquake that caused a major tsunami and then a nuclear disaster in northern Japan. And I have colleagues who I've been working with who have been studying the resilience of those children who were affected. This is a town in northern Japan called Yamada. And if I might, I just want to sort of show you what happened. This is what the town looked like before the tsunami. And then, of course, this massive 11-meter wave crashed into the town. Fires broke out, mass devastation, and complete chaos. Now, many of the children actually survived because they were in schools that had tsunami alerts and they were evacuated to higher ground. Many of the parents, however, died as a consequence of the wave, of the waters. Now, when I went there, we were trying to understand what makes children resilient. How do they cope? What makes them rugged and resourced? And my colleague, Dr. Akiyama, was very helpful with taking me around. So this is the same town after all the garbage, all the destroyed buildings was taken away. What you're looking at is not a school. What you're looking at is an after-school school. The not-for-profit, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the aid organizations that came to help the children after the tsunami built places like this. Children came from their temporary residences that they'd been housed with often extended family if their parents had died. And they would come to these after-school schools, one of these you're looking at, to study. Because what I was told was that a Japanese child's normal life is to study all day, and then after school to go to school in these after-school schools. That is not the Canadian way for children in my country, but it is for Japanese children. Now, if we're thinking about how do you make a child more resilient? Well, of course, we've been talking about, do you give them the resources to make them feel more normal? Do you say to a child, I want you to be hopeful about the future? Optimism is another trait of resilient children. But you don't just say to a child, be optimistic. You give them a pathway to the future. You help them to feel normal. So these children who felt like, oh my God, my parents are dead, my school is destroyed, I will never get anywhere in life, they were suddenly back in a way of living that looked like other normal Japanese children, and that they now felt like their path forward, education-wise, their futures were more secure. And this then comes back to this idea, of course, of helping children to navigate and negotiate for what they need, the rugged and qualities and the resources they need to do well. But I know sometimes we think in very limited ways. Okay, my child has this talent, or they have to go to university, therefore I must take that talent and snap it together like a puzzle piece. But that's actually not what we know about resilience. Resilience is not really like puzzle pieces fitting together. They have one quality that they express in one way. Instead, children are like what's called tangrams. They're combinations of many different shapes. And when times are good, maybe they make squares or rectangles. But they can also be birds and other things as well. So this then raises the questions about how can we help our children find many different ways of expressing themselves, of finding a powerful identity? Who'd have ever thought of giving an 11-year-old boy a mop and a janitor as a mentor? But that was magical in his particular way of seeing the world. And that means that your children too have particular ways, special talents, certain sports activities. If you've ever been a parent that has tried to get your child to learn an instrument, maybe piano, violin, accordion, whatever, and they've gone, oh, this just doesn't fit me. It's because I think sometimes we think, well, for their success, it has to be that instrument, that child, that fit. Whereas actually, maybe instruments aren't the thing. Maybe they're more sports minded. Maybe they want to be in theater. Maybe they want to be quietly in the corner just reading a book. And this is really the story of what makes children resilient. Now, if I might, can overprotected children be resilient? Because I'm kind of talking about giving children lots of different choices. And unfortunately, we have an expression here in Canada, certainly, about snowplow parents or overprotected parents who bubble wrap their children. And if you think about it, those parents are taking away from their children the very opportunities they need to do well in life. They aren't giving them enough stress to experience all the challenges and the responsibilities that they need to grow up well. And I got to tell you, we are seeing a spike in hospitalizations and emergency room visits amongst our children who are showing more and more anxiety and depression in Canada. Over the last 12 to 15 years, this has become an epidemic, not just during COVID-19 times, but even before. So let me give you a quick little exercise. That's a picture of my own daughter. One of my daughters coming out of the forest, being a wild animal. But when I meet parents who are afraid to give their children responsibilities or to let them out of their sight, to let them go on sleepovers, they're always afraid of, they do everything for their child. They're overprotective of their child. I always say, okay, just a second. When you were growing up, did you take any risks? Did you have some responsibilities in your life? I always start with that question. And then I say, well, taking those risks, did you learn anything? I had one parent recently say, oh yes, I'll never date a guy like that again. We learn things by taking on responsibilities. We learn things by taking on risky situations. And of course, were those lessons helpful or unhelpful to you later in life? And inevitably people say, yes, they were helpful to us. And of course, then the question I always have for parents who are overprotective, who refuse to let their children, I don't know, ever cook a meal, ever pack their own soccer when they go to play football, and they won't even let the child pack their own gear. The child's 12 years old and the child still's mom or dad is putting the gear in a bag. And I'm going, what craziness. Give your child those genuine responsibilities. If they fail, they fail. So I always say, okay, look, you had risks growing up. How, if you are going to protect your child and you're never going to give them responsibilities, how will your child learn the same life lessons that you learned? And that becomes absolutely critical to their resilience longer term. I always say it's far better to offer a child a substitute, an opportunity to have an adventure than just trying to constantly suppress what they want to do. It's the difference of, I don't know in Chile if they have these still, but these are really dangerous because they thunk kids on the head. And even though, let's face it, kids love to get on these things and spin around and then get off and throw up and everything else. But anyways, one of the things we've been doing, I've seen around the world, not just in Canada, but many other countries, is they've replaced those other things with these. Still, there's an adventure. Still, there's a sense of adventure for a child, but it's simply not as dangerous. So I guess always the trick here is, how can we say to our children, yes, you can have responsibility. You can look after yourself. You can have some control. You can do things that are a little bit risky, rather than always saying to our children, no. And I would just want to sort of show you a funny little video this is a video from from New Zealand. I just want to show you a very funny little video from New Zealand of a school that has basically decided to let children do whatever they want without rules. Have a look at this just for a minute or two, okay? I think you might find it interesting.
Here, on the outskirts of Auckland, students as young as 5 do whatever they want in the playground. They roam around with no shoes, but plenty of homemade weapons. They climb as high as they can, and often higher. Not in secret, but blatantly. Proudly. These kids don't care who sees.
And there's basically no rules. Yeah, there's no rules, basically.
Before school, the kids make the rules.
Wait, please! Yeah!
But in the 2 40-minute play sessions after forced food breaks, anything goes.
Are you scared? I'd be scared.
You would be scared because you might be too heavy.
Oh, thanks.
No rules, no limits, no problem for the principal.
Let me start there. You can look that up as the School Without Rules if you want to watch the whole video. My point is that let's go back through the checklist. How do we help children become more resilient? Not by overprotecting them, but by giving them genuine responsibilities, by giving them opportunities to contribute, by making them feel safe, but that doesn't mean by taking away all the opportunities they need to learn to keep themselves safe. We need children to feel like they have powerful identities, that they can make decisions, that they have structure and consequences to their actions. But a child who's always overprotective will never have those opportunities to ever, well, frankly, fail. So let me give you just a few hints about opportunities in children's lives that make them more resilient. Failure is okay, as long as they have the supports to fix their mistakes. And I love giving children work or volunteer opportunities, opportunities to make a contribution, to practice their skill sets. Even dangerous toys like pocket knives and scooters, makeup, video games, etc. Our children need opportunities to experiment with their bodies, which, of course, no surprise, well, frankly, they also need to be able to move around their community, use the bus, walk, skateboard, whatever. If they're older, drive. Now, of course, you know your city, you know your town, so you only give your child what is reasonably safe. But I do think children need to begin to experience some of this stuff, so that the problem now we're experiencing here where I live is that children have none of these opportunities, and then they go off to university or college, and suddenly they have to learn all of those skills on their own when they're away from their families. They also need bodily experiences. They need to celebrate their going through puberty, their first loves. They need to have a sense that they have a body. And of course, things like outdoor challenges as well, wilderness trips, extreme sports, whatever. Basically, what I'm trying to say is our children, they need adventures. They need opportunities to develop their resilience. It's not something that's just in their heads. It's when we create opportunities around them for them to learn and develop the skills they need to do better in life. Where I live, we actually live in one of the parts of the world with the highest tides, 14 meters high on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, where I live. And one of the great advantages of that is we have mud. We have the best mud in the world here. And I just love watching kids, and these are some of my own kids and their friends, out on the mud flats and just playing in the mud and getting dirty and everything else. And when I think about making our children more resilient, it's that adventuresome spirit of getting in there, of getting dirty. Now, of course, during COVID, we've made our children's lives we've washed their hands and wear masks and everything else. But eventually COVID will be done. And then we're going to have to help our children once again get comfortable, hugging and taking the masks off and even getting dirty. And all of this together, if you've kind of caught what I'm saying, is you as their fairy godmothers and fairy godfathers have an obligation to make children more resilient. You can inspire them to self-regulate, to think calmly, yes, but you are also there to create structure and consequences, opportunities to show their talents, opportunities to find the connections and the relationships they need to do well. You are so pivotal, whether an educator or a parent, you are so pivotal to creating the right conditions for your child to navigate and to negotiate for the kinds of resources that they need. And that is actually what the science of resilience teaches us about making a child do well when there is a serious crisis in their lives. So on that note, I'd love to hear your questions and comments, and I will pass it back to the organizers, Monica, Danielle, and John, and I so appreciate you reaching out across borders and giving me this opportunity to share some ideas with you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Mike. Se agradece la presentación. Estamos, la verdad, muy contentos que pudiste entregar estas herramientas tan relevantes e importantes. Con esto vamos a comenzar entonces con la ronda de preguntas. Aquí les pido que vaya, les pido a todos que por favor dejen sus preguntas en el chat. ¿Y quién las va a tomar? Va a ser John, para que por favor la pueda ir junto a Mike, pueda pasándole las preguntas y Mike también respondiéndolas.
Thanks, John, for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Mike. First of all, thank you very much for your speech. It's been amazing. And I think it's left us all with a lot of things to think. You mentioned experience all over the world, talking about resilience and working with resilience. What would you say is probably the biggest difference that you found between Latin cultures and the American or Canadian cultures? I would say we tend to be more overprotective, maybe. Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
First of all, on overprotection, I see that in many different cultures, in North America, in Asia, in China, in Cambodia. I see that same pattern in many different countries. What sometimes saves a child, however, at least from my experience with Latin American cultures, is that there is still at least a high expectation of the child that they do something for their family. The difference in North America, or say the United States and Canada, is a child is given no responsibilities, but there's never an expectation that they will actually contribute to their family or look after their parents or be nice to their parents for that matter. And I find often the biggest difference is that, at least in my experience in Colombia, Brazil, is that children still see themselves as part of families and having some responsibilities to, making the family proud, that type of thing. So there's a little bit more of a collective tone. That's been my experience. I don't know if that's true or not, but sometimes I feel like in North America, a child goes, well, nobody needs me, and everyone does everything for me, and I don't care about them at all. And I don't see such selfishness in the children I've met in Colombia or Brazil, for instance.
I would agree with you, Mike. I think you're right with that. We're waiting here for some questions. Estamos esperando a ver si hay algunas preguntas. Aquí hay una. María José Sepúlveda asks, thank you very much for your talk. Very interesting. What do you mean with consequences, or what do you mean by consequences?
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a good question, because people often think about punishment. In Spanish, I take it you can distinguish the two words, punishment and consequences.
Castigo y consecuencia.
Punishment means I impose on you something that you've done. I must now punish you. I must make you feel uncomfortable, ashamed, wrong. Those don't work very well for resilience. A consequence says to a child, you have made a mistake. You have caused harm to yourself or someone else. How are you going to fix it? So let me be very concrete. When my son would not set the table and help with the chores of the family, the consequence was, then I am not going to cook you your dinner. I'm not going to take food away from you. You can eat, there's still food. But the consequence was that I am not going to be his servant if he's not willing to contribute to the family. The consequence was also one that he could fix. There was no punishment. I didn't send him to bed without his dinner. I didn't hit him. I didn't do anything like that. I simply said, here's a problem that you can solve. So you can cook your own dinner, or you can contribute to the family. And anytime you want to start contributing to the family, then I will cook you your dinner. it was within his control to fix. A different one, if a child is constantly unable to say they go to bed at night and they have their gaming system or their cell phone on, I often hear this from parents, then the consequence should be that if you're the consequence should be that you're not getting enough sleep. Sleep is really important neurologically for little brains to develop. If you can't self-regulate and close your phone down yourself, then I, as the parent, will come in and I will take that away from you. But the moment you come to me and say, look, Dad, I have a plan. Okay, I can now self-regulate. I can turn off my phone myself. I say, good, that's great. Here's your phone back. Let's try it. I come in an hour after they're asleep. If the phone is off, they have learned. They have already figured out their own solution. They have taken control and they have found a solution to their particular problem. If they can't control it, then I might in fact take the phone away or turn off the internet in the house or put on a passcode, a password that they can't get up on the internet or something. But my point is that a consequence should be allow the child to help solve their own problems rather than us as adults always imposing a solution on them. And that builds resilience longer term, because then the child has the skills that when something bad happens, like at university later on when they're outside of their house and something bad happens with a teacher, a professor, they know how to solve a problem. If we don't give them opportunities when they're this high to solve problems and make mistakes, then how are they going to solve them when they're this high? It doesn't make sense otherwise.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Danielle asks, how can schools and homes work together in assigning responsibilities?
Great question. There's actually, again, a lot of good research that shows that when schools and parents work together on solutions, the child is much more likely to have positive academic and emotional success. So the question hints at something that's super important, which is that the school and the parents do have to communicate. But it is about consistency, so that if a school says, if the child does not finish the assignment, they are not able to go on the school trip, or they are not able to attend a certain activity at the school. The best is when the parents say, this is a problem, child, that you have created. You didn't do your homework. Therefore, you have to go talk to the principal and explain that this has happened and that you have a consequence, which is that you will not then go on the school trip or whatever it is. What often happens, though, is that the parents do not support the school, or the parents have a strategy that the school will not support. As much as possible, what we know from research is that when there is consistency in the structure, the routines, and the consequences, when a child carries an identity as powerful from one place to the other and back and forth, when there's communication between the adults, children do better. Even if they, in the moment, say, I'm really upset that the school's stupid and you shouldn't listen to them and everything else. But the point is that they actually have better developmental outcomes when we collaborate.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, Mike. Paula Ortiz says, thank you for the presentation. I am a sports psychologist, and in sports, resilience is a basic and vital factor. The sports experience can be lived in many different ways. Do you think that today's youth is less tolerant to frustration? Do you think that today's youth wants things immediately and can't wait? Today's youth is not patient?
Yes. I remember when my daughter was a few years younger, she was coaching little children. And I went to pick her up. She was 15 at the time. And I went to pick her up when she was coaching football amongst little children. And all the parents were in the stands watching their children practice, not a game, just a practice. And every time this little 5 or 6-year-old touched the ball with his foot, the parents jumped up and went, "Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing." I'm going, "Are you crazy? Your child has not done anything very special. Relax, go away. Let the child just play. They don't deserve that kind of praise for doing nothing." And I think sometimes what we've misunderstood is sports is about developing character and competencies, absolutely. But it has to be founded on something real, a real genuine experience, not just sort of made up. Also, I think sometimes, if I might, two things. One is, I think we sometimes forget that our experience in sports does depend not just on our mental health or mental toughness, but also on the supports around us. There are colleagues of mine, Dr. Sakar in England, who did studies with Olympic athletes who would overcome a major injury. And one of the dimensions was definitely their grit or their ability to think positively, yes. But what they also found was that when they had a good coach, a parent, a friend, somebody to drive them to practice or drive them to their physiotherapist, when they had someone helping them with meals so that they could recover quicker, all of those other fairy godmother-like functions helped them think more positively about the future as well. So I guess what I'm getting at is, with sports, it's partly the coach is as important as the mental fitness of the individual. And I do think we need to sort of keep that in mind, don't we? Rather than just sort of thinking it's all about the individual mind. I laughed. My daughter was also at one point coaching swimming or doing some swimming, and parents would feel, in Chile, do they have levels to the swimming, like Red Cross levels? You know what I mean? My daughter would fill out the forms. If your child passes level 3, they get to go on to level 4. And these parents, if the child didn't pass level 3, their parents would come over and they'd yell at my daughter. "How dare you fail my child? How dare you not let them go on to level 4? And she said, "Well, but they can't swim 50 meters. To get to level 4, you have to swim 50 meters. And what kind of crazy parent tells their child to go on to level 4? They're going to drown. They don't have the competency to swim the 50 meters. You can't fake swimming." Anyways, my point is that there's something very real about sports, and that children respond. It's not failure. It's that a failure just simply means an opportunity to reinvent yourself and find other talents. That is the magic of sports.
I think we have time for one last question. This is Alfredo Tagle's question, and he asks, is there a correlation, a direct correlation between resilience and maturity? Does it mean that if you're more mature, you're more resilient? Where do both concepts cross, maturity and resilience?
I have not seen studies that do exactly that. Mostly because a child, say, with a disability or who's immature in their presentation can still have resilience. I don't necessarily want to make it sound like a child has to behave in a certain way, because children can find success. So an immature child might still find a great deal of happiness, friendships. They like themselves. They show their talents. They have relationships. Like, all of those things are what that you need to get through a crisis. Now, decision making, yes, is an important skill, but just because a child is immature doesn't mean that they can't sometimes make good decisions. The trick here, of course, is that we as the parents in their life don't give an immature child too much stress. If we know our child is immature and we give them a highly difficult task to do with a lot of responsibility, we have set them up for failure. But if we give an immature child a task that maybe stretches them just a little bit, then what we've done is we've given them what's called scaffolding, or a ladder to the next step in their lives. So part of it is we can help an immature child develop the competencies that they need. And sometimes immature children are actually quite resilient because they have the skill set they need to deal with the stressors that are right now in their lives. And they do fine. So we put to the best. So I guess sometimes it's about us as the adults creating the right environments to help our children grow step by step by step, rather than thinking, well, they're immature, they're not resilient. The resilience is on us to create the right environment for them to thrive.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Mike, I skipped a question.
Sure.
So this is the last one, and it's from Enzo Arias, and it's, how can we develop resilience in the classroom in order to improve learning?
Well, I've written extensively about this, but I really do think that those same 9 things, teachers are amazing at creating those environments. In fact, I'm working right now with this R2 program with several school boards, and they have we've been designing whole curriculums around this idea of building resilience. And it comes down to things like, can you in a classroom give children a sense of optimism? Can you create a sense that children are going to be successful? So a teacher who looks at a child and says, I believe in you, I see talent here, and I'm going to make it an opportunity for you to use your skills. That's a child who's going to become more resilient. A teacher, an environment that prevents people from feeling unsafe, or it doesn't create any bullying in the environment, of course, makes a child feel safe and like they belong. I love schools also that give children responsibilities, because out of those responsibilities, children find powerful identities and a sense of belonging and a sense of safety and security. So there are lots of tasks that children can do in the school. The one I always love, we're all doing this online thing. When I present in school gymnasiums to teachers, I love it when I see a student who is the one doing all the technical stuff. The one who plugs in those big speakers and makes that big pop sound when they plug in the speakers. I love seeing kids doing stuff like that because it gives them that sense of, I am more powerful. I am making a contribution. I am needed. And what we know is that those emotional reactions that schools are so good at creating actually trigger a set of changes, physiologically, psychologically, that actually make children less likely to experience depression and anxiety. But it starts with how we structure classrooms. Do we create calm when it's noisy? Do we allow children to express their talents? And do we create relationships? One of the biggest studies, I'll just end on this, one big study of children who were very depressed, even suicidal, showed that if they went to school and someone noticed them, if a teacher or a principal noticed that child every day and said, hello, welcome to the school, children who had teachers and principals like that showed lower levels of depression and suicide even when they had other risk factors like abuse in their lives. In other words, you as educators are the children's fairy godmothers too.
That's a beautiful way to end your speech, Mike. I think I need to hand the mic over to Daniel. On my part, Mike, I appreciate it very much and thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
A pleasure to meet you too.
Thank you, Mike, John, Mónica. Voy a hablar entonces más fácil. a Mónica también, que presentó a Mike. Nosotros estamos felices, estamos muy contentos de poder tener el apoyo de los colegios, de poder tener gente como Mike. Para nosotros lo que hacemos, es lo que vibramos, tratamos de entregar la mayor cantidad de competencias, creemos que esa es la base de una educación que parta por los papás, para que ojalá junto a los colegios trabajemos juntos, como dijo Mike, en que haya temática en común y que se pueda justamente fortalecer una mirada que es cómo queremos tener hijos emocionalmente más sanos, más felices, más contentos. Solamente tomar un minuto para invitarlos, que el 1 de septiembre, si usted me pregunta a mí, yo leí algunos de los libros de Mike y son increíbles. Pero ¿por qué pasó toda esta idea? Porque leí un libro que se llama Unselfie, que es de Michelle Volpa. Y ella va a estar con nosotros el 1 de septiembre, en los mismos canales, y de verdad, ella habla cómo desarrollar empatía en una época de pantallas. Los dejo invitados de ya, es tremendo concepto, cómo yo empatizo con el otro. Habla lo que explicó muy bien Mike, de ver las consecuencias que uno tiene, porque es muy difícil ver las consecuencias offline cuando mis relaciones son online. Y esa es un poco la idea, ese es el cariño de poder entregar competencias. Se adjuntó también la presentación de Mike, está ahí en el chat. También esta presentación va a quedar a disposición de los colegios, en distintos canales, por si alguien quisiese, en verdad, volver atrás a alguna de las ideas que dijo. Nuevamente, les agradezco en nombre de UCOM, de que estuvimos con el Lincoln, con el Grange. Para nosotros son grandes socios en esto. Mike, un abrazo grande, cariñoso, de toda la familia chilena acá, por todo el conocimiento que nos diste. Muy buenas noches para todos, para todas, que descansen y nos estaremos viendo en una próxima oportunidad. Muchas gracias. Yo querido a todas las familias, muchos saludos. Mike, a real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mike.
Muchas gracias.
Thank
a todos.
you.
Really
Bye
amazing.
bye.
Thank you.
Gracias,
Un
Daniel.
grande, muchas